Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to today's version of Ask. I've put people on mute, try to keep people from giving too much feedback while our speaker is presenting. Tracy Resvani will be presenting Scams in Today's World Come to You. Learn how to spot common scams and see how they are mutating for the coronavirus and the census. And she's representing the Montgomery County Office of Consumer Protection. So I'll turn it over to you, Tracy. Good. Thank you.
Thank you. So if you have questions as we go along, usually I do this in person, and so you raise your hand and I can call on you. So what we can do is you can either put your questions in the chat box and Jeff can stop me and ask the question, or if you are having trouble accessing the chat box, he can unmute you and we can do this verbally. When I put the PowerPoint presentation on, I won't see you, so if you raise your hand, I unfortunately will not see you. So Jeff is going to have to drive that portion of the presentation.
I just have one thing to let people know. In addition to being able to unmute yourself, if you hold the space bar down, you temporarily unmute yourself and you could ask a question and then let go of the space bar and you'll be muted again.
All right. Well, let's share the presentation. And let's see. Oh, I'm trying to get rid of, there we go. All right. So as Jeff mentioned, I'm from the Montgomery County, Maryland Office of Consumer Protection. And our agency will be celebrating its 50th anniversary next year. So we've been here helping consumers and merchants resolve their disputes and work for consumer education and outreach for quite some time. During the pandemic, the best way to reach us is the general email inbox that you see on the first slide there. And hopefully, as we slowly open back up, our phone number will be available and we'll be able to start to take phone calls directly. So what do we do? If you have not used our office in the past, our main goal is to help parties resolve disputes. And so consumers can file complaints with us. We have investigators who then collect the information from the parties. They do their own investigation from third-party sources, and they try to get to the bottom of what the issue is to try and find a resolution that works for everybody. And ordinarily, if we had our phone, those same investigators would be available to take phone calls on any given day, 8 to 5, Monday through Friday. You could call our office if you have a question about your consumer rights or the merchant's rights for that matter, and they would just pick up the phone and be able to talk with you. We can also do drop-in appointments when it's permitted to do so, and that you can do without appointments at all. So you can just walk in. If you have a stack of papers, for example, and you want someone to help you go through it and try to understand what happened, we did do in-person consumer consultations. If in the course of our investigation, the investigators determined that the county's consumer protection laws were violated, we are part of the public safety group of agencies, and so we do have enforcement authority. And what that means is that we can then bring citations, we can do file applications for criminal charges, and so then we can engage in the enforcement side of consumer law as well. And as I mentioned, we do a lot of education and outreach to the community. And what's useful to know is that we provide our services not only in English, but in Spanish, who is basically handled by staff that we have on hand every workday. But through a really, really dedicated core of volunteers, we can also provide a lot of our services in Mandarin, Cantonese, Shanghai, Korean, Vietnamese, and French. So if you know of any friends or neighbors that this might be of some use to, definitely let them know. Last but not least, we also license and regulate certain businesses that operate in the county. So if you're getting your car fixed, that we register all the car repair firms in the county. If you're having a house built, new home builders need to be licensed by our office. If someone's coming into your home to repair your dishwasher or your refrigerator, they should be registered with our office. If you shop at a high-end consignment shop, or you're dealing with a pawn shop, for example, they need to have our license as well. And so we register the tow companies who hopefully are not towing your cars. So that's the industries that we license and regulate in the county. And I'm going to pause after every slide just to give folks a chance in case there is a question pending. So today's topics are scams. And so I'd like to start with just some general statistics. In 2019, it was estimated that 50% of all the calls that got made to your cell phone were from robo-dialers. And so think about that. Half of the traffic on your cell phone was a robocall. That said, in the same year, there was only 40,432 reports of scams coming in from international sources. And for those 40,432 reports, $151 million was lost. So what this tells you, and actually if you look at the FTC's Consumer Sentinel, they only had 91,560 reports, totaling $276.5 million. But if half of the calls to your cell phone are from robo-dialers, that tells you that this is a severely underreported set of numbers, because you know that there's more than 130,000 scams happening in a given year. So who are targeted? Seniors have historically been targeted, and for many reasons. You know, one, there's this notion that there's a nest egg that is a ready pot of money to tap into. And seniors were raised to be more polite and perhaps trusting with folks. Seniors are less likely to report fraud, which is unfortunate. And a lot of seniors do tend to live alone and therefore have no one to bounce conversations off of. Oh, what do you think about this? I just got a call that said X. On the other side, millennials are now rapidly increasing as a fraud target. And that's because they're way too comfortable online. They trust websites and things on the internet way too easily. And they have lacked a set of financial literacy education in their younger years, where adults, more senior adults, tend to have at least a set of experiences to draw from. So those are the two main targets that we're seeing more and more. So what are common types of scams that you're going to see out there? Healthcare, going after your Medicare ID, that was definitely ratcheted up big time last year when Medicare gave out new numbers. Investment scams, we're going to talk about all of these COVID treatment and vaccine investment scams that the SEC and FINRA have been warning everyone about. IRS scams. If it wasn't bad enough with IRS identity theft, with tax identity theft, you now have scads of these scams after the stimulus payments. And we do hear reports of diversion of not only refunds that are coming, but stimulus payments as well. Mail fraud is on the rise, and we'll talk about why later. And lottery and sweepstakes are the usual things that show up in your door, and we'll talk about that. But as you can anticipate, these days, there's going to be a lot of work from home scams coming our way. Grandparent scams is an oldie but goodie. They still continue. Any kind of government benefits, but obviously VA benefits, are always at risk. And funeral and cemetery scams. And this is an interesting one, because if folks are going in and pre-buying a package, once you're gone, the sole person who was a witness to the deal can no longer speak. And so when these merchants try to add on all these extra fees, there's no real proof as to what the conversation was. So it's really important to make sure everything is in writing. Financial exploitation, that can happen with caregivers, and it can happen with folks who are in charge of your money. Woodchucks, there's subspecies of unlicensed contractors, and we'll talk about what woodchucks mean. I am sure that you've probably gotten at least one phone call that your social security number has been inactivated. You may even get texts. Those are a huge scam. We had a consumer who actually ended up withdrawing $20,000 from our bank account to put in safekeeping in the hands of the Social Security Administration. So you can imagine where that money went. And so reverse mortgages, you have to read the fine print, obviously, but right now you're going to be dealing with a lot of mortgage assistant fraud. So that's also something to keep in mind. So what is the common scripting of a fraud? So whether it's coming through a phone, in person, mass mail, or email, there's a script, right? So they either have a deal for you that you just can't pass up, or they try to come at you with, hey, your friends are doing it, your neighbors are doing it, they sent me over. And you know, they try to charm you that way. Or if the price isn't right, well, how much can you pay? We've heard instances where, you know, prices have dropped by 50%, and it makes you wonder, well, if they were trying to scam the first price, or is it really all they want is some kind of deposit and never to return? This notion that this deal won't last forever, kind of, that's now getting a little more pushy to the notion of, you're going to be arrested, and we're calling from the sheriffs, from the FBI, from the police, whoever it happens to be, the IRS. Now they're jacking it up so that it's now that the script is, how are we going to get you if you don't do what we have? And a lot of times at the end of the result is they want two things from you: either your personal information so that they can sell it or commit identity theft, or money, or both. So understand that at the end of your at the end of the scam, no matter what the script is, that's the sell towards, is what's valuable to them. So we can start with telephone scams first. So I think you've probably realized that your caller ID lies to you. At this point, given that these calls are coming in internationally, usually, although there have been call centers in Chicago and the Carolinas that have been shut down, that means that they can use whatever phone number they want and cloak their real number because they're calling over the internet. And so you may see your phone saying Pepco. You're going to get a lot of calls from Pepco saying that you have to pay them in gift cards, or they're going to shut off your power. Or they may call and say, hey, you know, I can give you a discount if you would only put a credit card on your file. So, and the caller ID will say Pepco because they will mask it. You might get calls from the IRS. How many of you have gotten a call that's entirely in Chinese? Well, that's usually someone trying to find a Mandarin-speaking resident, and the end result, as we found out from one consumer, is that he ended up handing over his passport information to someone who claimed to be Shanghai police. So again, they're after money and data as well. They can also hide as private or unavailable or unknown. So it's really important to only answer the phone if you know the person who's calling you. And I know I said they can spoof it, so be very, very vigilant. And their whole point in calling is they're going to hit you hard because they want to scare you in that first few seconds, and they want you to turn off your brain and turn on your heart. And it's really, really important to not engage. So how bad is bad? And I think we started off saying that 50% of the cell phone calls last year were from robodialers. Phone scams are amazingly underreported. The FBI's Internet Crime Report for 2018 only had 26,000 reports. Of those, from those 26,000, 50 million was still lost. So it's, it takes time, but, if you do pick up the phone and report the call to the FTC and the FCC, they share jurisdiction over scam calls. And if you end up losing money, definitely report it to the FBI, because they're the ones who can potentially track down these folks no matter where they are. So how can you avoid? Avoidance is the best way. Screen your calls. Your caller ID, as I said, since it can lie to you, I think there's 2 questions pending. Let me see. I'm sorry. I've received a call from my own telephone number. How does that happen? That's exactly what happened to me, and that's because they're spoofing it. I was home alone, and my cell phone rang, and it was my home number calling me. It was like the makings of a horror movie, and actually, I think they made it into a horror movie. But it's all because they can disguise the phone number over the internet, and they can make it call from any number. In fact, you're more likely to get calls from your exchange. So if your phone number at home is 240-777, which is the county exchange, you're more likely to get spoofed calls with those numbers because their thought is you're going to pick it up because you think it's your neighbor. So the best thing to do is to let your voicemail, or if you have a home answering machine on your landline, let that pick it up. Let that be your screener, because if someone's going to leave you a message, then you can listen to it. If it's somebody you're expecting, then you can call it back. If you get a call and it's someone and there's that empty air, that's a machine calling you. Hang up. As soon as you know there's a threat, any kind of harassment, or if it's a solicitation, just hang up. One thing that someone told me in one of these classes, so I learned from you, and the advice this gentleman gave me is just say, hey, remember, IT support never called you when there was a problem. And that's true. And so the fact that Microsoft is calling because there's a virus on your computer, just remember that anytime you needed help, you had to sit on hold for 2 hours to get it. So just hang up. That is the best thing you can do after screening your calls. And if you sit through whatever the pitch is, and you think it might be a legitimate offer, hang up and then call back on a number that you have. So if you really think Pepco's calling you and there's a problem with your account, don't call back on the number they give you, because they're giving you the number to the cubicle next to you, next to them. So go to your bills, go find the number on the internet, go look on the back of your credit card and call that number. And make sure that this is legitimate and whoever's calling you. So do your own research and know that no offer is truly off the table. So if they're trying to sell you something, you've seen it on TV, limited time offer, buy one pillow, get a second one free, except that ad runs for 6 weeks. So it's never really truly a limited time deal. And we're told to make sure everyone knows to avoid saying the word yes on any of these calls, because they can just record that and then later say, and I just need to ask you these following questions, and you have signed up for the Tool of the Month Club, so say yes after everyone. And they go through this litany of disclosures, and now they've gotten your voice recorded saying yes to them. It's really difficult because they'll ask you questions and you want to say yes. So you have to be very careful not to do that. Oh, why are we not moving? Let's try it this way. All right, technology aids. So how can technology help you in cutting down on the number of calls that you're getting? So these call blocking technology are items, they're programs and products that Consumer Reports had ranked highly. And so Consumer Reports is usually a really good resource if you're trying to buy pretty much anything. If you go there, they've got good reviews on a lot of things. And so for cell phones, they had recommended Nomo Robo and Truecaller. And one of the things I've added is that at this point, all cell carriers have some kind of a free app. And I have Verizon, and theirs is called Call Filter. And that's a completely free app you download. And what happens now is anyone who calls me that's not already in my contact list, it says unknown. And sometimes it's an issue because if you're calling the main number for your doctor and the doctor calls back from a back line, it's going to come up unknown. And so I'm just letting it go to voicemail. And of course, now I've missed the call. But it does help you know that the call that's coming in is somebody that you don't really know. On your landline, Consumer Reports recommended Digit 1, HQ Telecom, and Sentry. Know that if you have any kind of a voice over IP or fiber landline situation, you can ask the company to help block anonymous calls. But you want to make sure you're not setting your filter so narrowly that you're not going to miss calls that are coming in from the back office of your doctor's office, for example. And I have a question about text blocking apps. I don't know of any text blocking apps. I know that you can set your phone to take nothing in from calls nothing in from numbers that are not in your contact list. That's a really, really narrow and strict setting. So I would use it as a last resort because, again, if the pharmacy is calling you from another number, if the doctor's calling you from another number, especially these days, I get calls from the doctor or the veterinarian from their home number. They're not going to get through. So there are ways of just completely locking down your cell phone, but it's extreme. So be sure that's what you want to do, I guess. There were some major regulatory changes at the end of 2019 that also are helping. Stir and Shaken, which I joke sounds like James Bond. So what it does, the Stir Shaken protocol, is that it forces the carriers to verify that the number calling is from the number that is showing up on your caller ID. And so while this is just verifying the phone number, not the caller. In other words, a person calling could be a complete scam artist, but at least it's verifying that the number is really from that number. And so right now, cell carriers are able to do that within their own network fairly consistently. What's happening is the cross carriers, that's the kind of data sharing that is still in progress. So if you've got a call, if you have T-Mobile and the call that's coming to you is on T-Mobile, Stir Shaken should work and should verify that number. But if your call is coming in from, say, TracFone or Verizon or someone else or AT&T, it may not work yet. And so there is currently a limitation that's being continually worked on. The TRACED Act was signed into law in January by the president, and that basically meant that before, carriers were permitted to block calls that came from invalid or unassigned numbers. The TRACED Act said that Stir Shaken had to be implemented at no additional cost to consumers. It also increased penalties that the FCC could levy, and it provided a whole lot more tools and enforcement opportunities for the FCC to crack down on robocallers. And it now requires the FCC to initiate rulemaking to further help consumers with spam calls and spam texts. So it's an exciting time for us because the FCC hopefully will just start working with all of the carriers, and hopefully in a short amount of time, maybe a year or two, this will all be rolled out. And there we go. All right, so COVID-19 and the census. I have two embedded audios of what the scam calls look like. So the COVID-19 phone scams, they are about stimulus checks, they're about insurance, because obviously everybody is worried about healthcare. They're offering free tests. They're pitching charities, whether to help folks who have been become ill or folks who have lost their job, or they pitch all sorts of bogus cures and preventatives. On the census side, it's possible that you are going to be hearing from folks that are pretending to be census takers to follow up. It's really, really important to make sure that you've taken the census. Montgomery County is really, really pushing hard because it is going to determine exactly how much resources the county will get in the next 10 years. At the bottom of the screen, you'll see a website that I've put in, and there we collect every kind of consumer information that has been any kind of consumer marketplace transaction that's been affected by COVID-19 and all of the state of the emergency orders. So if you have questions about health clubs, about mortgages, eviction, anything that has anything to do with your life as a consumer, we have tried to collect all of the various orders and guidances and resources in one place. If you go there and you think there's something missing, definitely get in touch with me. I'm happy to always add more resources. But if I've done this right, you should be able to hear some scam calls.
I don't hear a thing.
Oh, Is that the case? No one's hearing it? Because I shared audio and it should have been.
I'm not hearing anything either.
Oh, darn it. It always works, but I don't know why it didn't work this time. Well, I will send the links to Jeff and he can share it with everybody. Let's just move to the next slide then. Oh, no. Okay. All right. So cybersecurity, avoiding identity theft online and staying safe online. Those are huge because as we're home a lot more, we are going to be on the internet a lot more. And so this has been a huge, huge boon to the scam industry. So what is identity theft? Broadly defined, it's how when somebody steals your personal information and then uses it without your permission. So it's essentially the opposite of a power of attorney. And identity theft can obviously disrupt your finances and your credit history, but most don't think about how it could potentially impact your medical care. Medical identity theft is a huge sleeper crime. If someone ends up stealing your medical identity and is getting health care in your name, it's not going to show up on your credit report unless they don't pay a doctor's bill. So you may not know that it's even happening out there. But what we have heard are horror stories about people who've been denied drugs or health insurance or life insurance, not health insurance, but life insurance because of conditions or allergic reactions that they don't have, but the identity thief does. So it takes a lot of time and money to resolve, obviously. So it's really, really important to deter. So where is your information? Your information is in a lot of places. On the screen, I have who and where you are knowingly sharing and perhaps unknowingly sharing information. So the doctor's office, obviously, you hand over a lot of information to. You should know that a lot of the practices out there are still asking for your social security number. They don't need it anymore. And so a few times that I've come across this on those intake forms, I don't fill it out. It has never had any problems with getting any insurance paid or anything. I have someone who says they're not hearing. Is that true? Jeff, if you could let me know if you can work with the one consumer. Okay, well, I'll hearing now. Okay, all right, perfect, thank you. All right, so then obviously the pharmacy has your information, your school, like Montgomery College, or your kids' schools, your grandkids' schools. Anytime you open up a credit card, so if you open up a credit card at the gas station, and your work obviously has a lot of your information. If you open up a rewards card at the grocery store, they're gonna have some of your information. And if you go to a restaurant and you want some reward points, you know, you might have to give them your birth date or your anniversary date and your email address. What I always say is if they don't need to have the real information, then don't give it to them. So if all you really want is a coupon for your birthday and your birthday is January 1st, there's nothing wrong with giving your birthday as January 15th. They're going to send you a coupon for January and the whole month will be there. So consider creating a fake profile for things that don't matter in that sense. Obviously, a fake birthday to your doctor's office or to the pharmacy may cause problems with payments, but if all you really want are coupons or sale prices, and it doesn't really require real information to get that. Online, obviously, if you're shopping online, you're gonna end up giving your credit card information over. And you obviously are giving your address and email address and things like that. Be very careful with what you voluntarily share, whether it's on Facebook. Make sure your Facebook, if you're on Facebook or Twitter, is private so that you're not sharing with the world. And when you shop, I don't know if you've noticed, if you are looking at something but don't put it in your cart, or if you put it in your cart but don't check it out, for the next 3 weeks, you'll get nothing but ads. So you've got cookies that are watching you, and this is part of the things that you may not know is out there keeping an eye, and you're sharing information. We're hearing stories that some retailers are using visual systems to track your face to see where people go when they come into the store, and how they walk through the store and what do they pick up. And the idea behind that is that if they see someone who is, somewhere in their teens and they're always going into one area or two areas, and maybe they'll put them closer together. But they also want to see like what your shopping habits are. So they always have legitimate reasons, but facial recognition, if they're capturing your face and that gets hacked, now what bad guys have potentially your name, your address, your face. So think about all the things that can go wrong with unknowingly sharing information out there. So phishing, smishing, and hacking. So phishing is phony and phishing. It's a play on words, and that's where you give access to criminals through your emails by clicking on things, and that either downloads information or ends up engaging with some kind of transaction that you shouldn't have, that gives them information or money. Smishing is the same concept, except that it's from text or maybe social media messaging. Oh, I have a question. What do you think about using PayPal when ordering online? Is it safer than entering your credit card each time? We're going to get into how to shop online in a minute, but that's a very good question. So smishing is, again, when you give access. Hacking is the opposite. It's the misuse of a system to steal data. So access is taken, not given. And so those are three concepts that you're going to be hearing a lot about as we talk. So deter. You want to make sure you shred your documents, and if you're home and have a lot of time on your hands, go on a shred party. You don't want to give out your personal information. So social security numbers, driver's license numbers, Medicare ID, insurance cards. Don't want to give those out to anyone that shouldn't have it. And so be very, very, very conservative with who you share it with. You don't want to click on unsolicited emails. So phishing, we've talked about. Farming is when they go out and try to fish in a massive pool of people. Spear phishing is when they target a particular company. Whaling is if they're going after the CFO, they'll go out and figure out who that CFO's assistant is and go after that assistant and try to get in that way. You want to use passphrases. So passwords are no longer enough. So think of a phrase that you will remember. And it shouldn't be anything having to do with you. So if you love cats, cat lover should not be it, because that's an easy guess. So think of, I always throw this out because no one ever, thinks of this. I love kumquats. No one really, it's not a very popular fruit. No one would ever guess it, but don't use it because I use it a lot in these presentations. But then you want to mix up the password with letters and numbers and symbols. So the A in I love kumquats, the A could be the @ sign, the S could be a $, and the O could be a 0. So mix up that phrase, and then that's a much safer way to protect your information. You want to make sure your computer has the updated operating system, and that is on your phone, your tablet, your laptop, your desktop. They're all computers. Make sure the most up-to-date operating system is available. If you can, and I know for Apple products it probably is not really available, but if you can, you want to also install virus software, virus protection software, and malware protection software. So I put both on my computers because either whenever I run a virus scan, it will catch some malware, but when I run the malware scanner, it picks up others. And so double tracking it is always good. To double up on the protections. So detect. How do you detect if you've been a victim of identity theft? Bills, your statements. Either they stop coming, and I've heard in this class a couple years ago, someone mentioned that they stopped getting their mail, and when they went to the post office, they realized their mail had been diverted because her husband had become a victim of identity theft. So if you stop getting your mail, or if you start getting new statements for accounts you don't know anything about, that's usually a good sign that something's happening. If you get denied for credit, insurance, things like that, that's usually a sign. You want to make sure you're getting your credit report and reviewing it. During the state of emergency, you can get it weekly. So if you really want to be on top of it, you can absolutely do that. Or you can do it once a year through annualcreditreport.com. However, if you do every 2 or 3 months, you can hit each credit reporting agency one at a time. If you'll note, I have 5, not the 3 that most folks know about. So Innovus is one that, while it doesn't give you a credit score, it is a credit reporting agency. And historically, it had been a resource for landlords, but it is being used more and more. And NCTUE is the National Consumer Telecommunication and Utilities Exchange. And it's partnered with Equifax, I want to say, but I think it might also, it's either Equifax or Experian. But what's interesting is that if you do a credit freeze with the big 3, it will not freeze the other 2. And so what we have is situations where folks have put a credit freeze on, and yet someone's managed to walk into a Sprint store or a Verizon store and open up a fake account and order up 10 iPhones and have it shipped somewhere in their name. So it's if you're going to freeze your credit, you want to hit all 5. And if any of the information is not accurate in any of these, you want to contact the credit reporting company and contest it. FTC's got more about identity theft, and the Consumer Finance Protection Bureau actually has some sample letters that you can use to challenge anything on your credit report. So how do you defend? Fraud alerts, credit freezes, and credit locks. So what are these 3 items? A fraud alert used to be a 90-day alert, and you would put it on your credit reporting, to the credit reporting company. And basically, whenever anyone tried to open up credit in your name, it would require some additional checking. But you could still get credit through. A credit freeze is just that. It is a complete lockdown. No one can use your credit, including you. They give you a PIN, and therefore you can turn it off and on as you need, but you got to give it a few days to take effect. Credit freezes used to be $5. They became free in Maryland. They're free to not only for you, but for any minor children or to any adults that you have guardianship over. So this is very, very useful. Credit freezes are now free nationwide after a federal law that got passed, given the huge data breach with Equifax. So because that $5 was lost, they came up with this new product. It was called a credit lock. And you contract with the credit reporting agency, and it's like an app, and you can turn it off and then turn it on again, turn it off and turn it on again. Last I heard, those were $20 a month. Fraud alerts and credit freezes have the protections of federal statutes behind you in case something goes wrong after you put them in place. Credit locks are a creature of contract. The fine print spells out whatever their duties and obligations are, and they may or may not be extensive. And if a credit lock doesn't work, you may have to end up suing them in court in order to get any of your rights, assuming they allow courts, and most likely it's an arbitration. If you've been a victim, you want to affirmatively call your other security and fraud departments for your other credit cards. I always suggest getting a police report, because if you end up having to fight debt collection down the road, that police report could be useful. You want to report it to the FTC and the FBI, especially if there's money lost. The FBI is crucial. In Maryland, you can get a restriction code on the back of your driver's license that says that you've been a victim of identity theft. This was useful. I had a volunteer whose sister would routinely give her information, the volunteer's information, to the police when she was pulled over, and never obviously tell her sister that she'd done that. The sister would never obviously report to a court. There was warrants out for her arrest. It was kind of crazy. And so she was able to get this MVA restriction so that if anyone got pulled over and gave her name, the officer would know to double check the information to make sure this is really her. If your Medicare or your Social Security card is compromised, you want to call those agencies right away. So here we can talk about how to pay for things online. I always advocate that credit cards are probably the safest way you can go for many reasons. One, if there's fraud, you have federal rights under federal regulations and laws that give you the ability to dispute that charge and have the bank then pull the debt off of your credit card while they investigate and do what they do. When you use the, and I'm sure folks have these hybrid cards, as I call them, they're your ATM card, but it has like a Visa or a MasterCard logo. Those aren't really credit cards. Those are not really ATM or debit cards either. They're sort of a marriage of both. And it's a little unclear exactly what law is mandatorily applied. If you're using these hybrid cards right now, the bank is honoring all of the dispute procedures that are applicable to credit cards. But understand that while they go through their process, you're still out of money out of your bank account. Whereas if it was on a credit card, you're leaving debt on your credit for maybe a month while they figure it out and take it off your account. So from a fiscal planning basis, credit cards are better. So then how does peer-to-peer systems, oh, and I missed the question that came along, Jeff. I didn't click on it fast enough, so I'm hoping that you can, I'm sorry, Jeff. Well, maybe I can catch it the next time it pops up. So then we're dealing with these peer-to-peer apps. PayPal is the granddaddy of them all. But then there's Venmo, there's Cash Apps, there's Apple Pay. There's so many of them. These are designed to be quick and easy ways to give money to people you know. We don't recommend that they be used for online shopping and shouldn't be used to accept or send money from people that you don't know or trust. Most of them are not managed by a bank. Zelle is the only app that is owned. It's a conglomeration of several banks that own Zelle as the app. But they're basically third-party companies that you're now sharing your bank account information with. And so you have to rely on them to keep that banking information secure, or your credit card, your debit card information secure. They don't offer you the same consumer protections as other payments like credit cards. So we end up dealing with a lot of complaints that come in where someone bought something off the internet. Lately it's been, you know, masks, gloves, sanitizer, whatever, and they don't show up, and now they're having to fight through PayPal or Venmo or whatever the app system is to try to get that money back. It's not as simple as just disputing it if it was on your credit card. So this is sort of the greatest quick way of doing it. Don't use them to purchase a product unless you know the person. So for example, if you're sitting in, or you're not doing it now, but if you're in one of those home parties where they sell Tupperware or housewares or candles or nail polish or whatever, and that's a person you're sitting there face to face and the host is vouching for them, that's one thing if you're going to use that payment system to share it with that person and buy products that way. You want to double and triple check the address that you're being asked to send the money to. I can't tell you how many times we have had complaints where the person they've been dealing with is Jane Doe, but the email is going to johnsmith@gmail.com. And then we say, well, did you ask why the email didn't match the person's name? And, you know, the answer is, well, no. So you want to make sure everything is matching and makes sense to you. And then you want to opt in for a stronger security setup. So on my PayPal account, I've got multi-factor authentication. That can be an app. You can, for me, they sent me this little plastic key ring fob that I press, and every time I press, it gives me a new number. That's like an old way of doing it. So you want to have as many layers of security as they offer, take it. Whatever makes it easier for you to use makes it easier for the bad guys to misuse. So throw in all these extra layers if you're going to use any of these payment apps. So what kind of phishing and smishing scams are we seeing these days? I think we talked about the stimulus checks. We're going to get a lot of emails coming in about how to apply for it. PPP, the payroll protection program. There's a lot of emails going out about that. Free tests, hotspots or virus tracking. You know, click here if you want to see who in your neighborhood has gotten COVID-19. You're going to get a lot of emails offering you masks, sanitizers, cures, preventions. Just avoid that because these are hard to find items. Why would they be offering it to you unsolicited, right? Census scams, in a normal year, we would be expecting a lot. I'm not sure why it hasn't quite reached us. There's been a lot of scam activity out there, but it could still hit. So I need everyone to be aware that because the census is being taken online scams could be coming. If you get any emails from the census saying, hey, you haven't filled it out, click here, you want to hover over the email address that it's coming from. Make sure it's coming from census.gov, not o.census.gov or census.gov.com. Like it's just got to be the right email address. And if you go to our website, there's under the media tab, we have a newsletter page, and we have a whole newsletter about the census, the American Community Survey, and the current population survey, which are all happening at the same time this year. So there's a lot of information being asked of us this year, the census being one that is given to absolutely everybody, and it's really, really important that we all fill it out, just do it safely. Identity theft obviously is the #1 risk in a census scam. The census does not ask that many questions. It's not going to ask for account information or social security number, anything like that. The American Community Survey asks a lot of personal questions, but again, it's not going to ask for anything that is going to be self-identifying. So don't hand that over. If you see that, you definitely want to call the census and verify. And again, our newsletter, which if we have time, I'll take you to while I'm sharing the screen, has the phone numbers that you can call. At the beginning of the year, job scams were huge. When you did a search for census jobs, because obviously census takers are going to be hired in huge quantities, the top 3 hits on a Google search was not census.gov. There were third parties who for a fee were offering to qualify you for a census job, which was not the process at all. So it's really important to always be vigilant. Romance scams. These hit everyone of every age, and it's more than a broken heart. So catfishing is another name that it's called, and it's turned into some kind of an MTV show, but it's not entertaining. It's a con game. The person will use social media, dating or website apps, or other venues to create a false identity for themselves, so that when you go to search them up, you'll see that this identity pre-existed the first contact with you. They'll find public data on their victims and find the hook to reel them in. It could be based on common shared interests, faith, hobbies, anything like that. And the ultimate goal is money. And in 2018, $210 million was reported as stolen. And remember, all scams are underreported. So this is all that we simply know about. So how can you avoid romance scams? One, there's always a script that goes with it. They'll find you to sell themselves, and then they'll immediately press you to communicate off platform, right? So if you meet them on a particular platform, they want to move off right away so that there's no evidence or tracking of your conversations. And they'll start to groom and express really strong emotions in a real quick amount of time, in a short amount of time. They may claim to be in a foreign country, which would make Skype or other video chat difficult. Although in this day and age, you would think that wouldn't work because everybody is video chatting, but this is still continuing. They're obviously not going to be anywhere within driving distance, because if that was the case, then you could always insist on meeting them in person, and that's something they'll never want to do. They want to gain your trust. They'll propose marriage, and they might ask for intimate pictures so that they can use it later to blackmail you for more money. But ultimately, something happens. I lost my job, which is very believable in this day and age, or there was a storm, or whatever the excuse is. They'll ask you to give them money and wire it. Anytime you wire anything, it's really difficult for authorities to track. Wiring is the least trackable method of payment. And they'll keep coming back and back again and again. And or, you know, they might even, you know, conscript a friend to help as a helper. Hey, you know, I have a friend who lives near you. Maybe they can help you get me money or something. So it becomes really elaborate. And as soon as you start asking questions, they disappear. Obviously, if you're out money, again, anytime you're out money in a scam, FBI is where you go. The FTC was really, really vigilant with the Nigerian scams because, as it turned out, they believed, and that's the case they brought, that Western Union was turning a blind eye to a lot of scams and allowing their platform to be used for wiring of money for either Nigerian scams or these kinds of scams, any kind really, because they were making a commission off of it. So FTC is also a good place to call, but the FBI is like the first place that I would recommend if you know anyone who's been in this situation. Door-to-door scams. In a normal year, this may not be a normal year, but this is still good advice to share with your friends and family. It's when scammers come knocking. So there's obviously legitimate door knocks, and then there's illegitimate ones. What are some legitimate door knocks that you're likely to get? Going on the afternoon walk, there was someone walking around our neighborhood. He had a lanyard with an ID and a clipboard, and it looked like he was there as some political affiliation trying to get names for a petition. You may end up with folks from religious institutions coming to your door. People selling you solar panels, windows, doors, siding. Census takers may still be coming to your door if you haven't turned in your census. Ask to see their ID. It should have the Census Bureau's watermark on it. And all they're going to do, the census, is to say, do you need anything to fill the census out yourself? They're just there to facilitate you engaging in the census process. If you're dealing with someone at your door, ask them for their solicitation license. Our Department of Permitting Services issues those, and I believe they are still issuing them even through the state of emergency. But if they say, oh, I don't have a license, I don't need a license, anything like that, firmly say goodbye and then shut your door. So be sure that whoever's at your door is complying with the law. That's usually the very basic thing. If they're not going to comply with the law on something as simple as getting a license, then you have to ask yourself, well, where else are they going to cut corners? If you get a scam door knock, report it to us so that we can then alert the public as well. So the other kinds of scams that you're likely to get, you might get kids coming to the door selling candy. There's a lot of purported charities, or those things, entities that claim to be charities, that are putting kids in pretty unsafe situations without any sort of adult supervision to sell candy for camps or trips or things like that. And it's really unclear what the value of these programs really are to the kids. They're selling magazines, although I'm not sure people read magazines anymore, but it used to be they come to your door, sell magazines, and then you'd never get them. Home improvement, they can come to your door and claim that their neighbor just did their driveway and they have leftover supplies, or that, you know, their neighbor recommended that they come. They have a slow schedule. They'll come up with all sorts of reasons to why they happen to be at your door. Energy scams, I think we've talked a little bit about the Pepco scams calling, or Washington Gas in this area could very well be calling. In Maryland, we're a deregulated state for supply, which means that for electricity, your supplier could be anybody and you would still get a bill from Pepco. So it's really, really important that if someone says, I'm calling from your utility or I'm calling from Pepco, I can save you money. Think back to what we talked about. Did the IT department call you when you needed help? Well, then why would they be calling you to, getting you to pay them less money? So you want to ask a lot of questions. Make sure you're not dealing with an alternative supplier that's trying to slam you into changing your supplier of energy. So the coronavirus scams that were coming toward your door, we had heard in some jurisdictions a report that folks were going door to door claiming that they were providing testing for WHO or the CDC. Luckily, we have not had any reports of something like that here, but it's important to make sure that whoever's coming to your door is who they say they are. Woodchucks, has anyone ever heard of this? So woodchucks, it's a play on an old nursery rhyme, or a riddle, if you will. They're unlicensed home improvement contractors, but they're storm chasers, and most often they're landscapers. They come to, oh, what about police union calling for money? Is that a scam? Well, so we have been doing a lot of work lately, and you may have heard about it on the news. There's a lot of political action committees, PACs and super PACs, that are calling you and pretending that they're taking money for police, firemen, veterans, folks that have cancer. And you know, they have a script that they follow, but they never once say, I am a political action committee and you're donating to a PAC, and we're going to use this money to support candidates. And so these scam PACs have found a way around charitable laws. So charities have a whole host of reporting requirements they have to make to the Maryland Secretary of State. PACs have very minimal reporting that they have to do to the Federal Election Commission. And so what we discovered in working on the Heroes United PAC was that I want to say about 95% of the money that they collected did not go to anything remotely resembling assistance to any firefighter organization. They had done some radio ads for a few politicians. None of them were politicians in the state of Maryland. And most of the money ended up going to call centers and solicitors and advertisers. And as best as we could tell, the advertisers were somehow connected back to the underlying owner of this PAC. So when you ask about, is the police union calling me? The answer is, I don't know. It could be a PAC. It could be the union. It could be a legitimate charity fundraising operation. And so those are like when you go to the grocery store and they ask you if you want to add $1 to go to leukemia research. So those are legitimate solicitations by third parties. So if you want to donate to leukemia and you happen to be a Giant and you can add $1, that's fine, but you should know that the vast majority of that $1 is going to go to Giant. Only a small portion of it will go to the charity in question. And the charities are fine with that because that's getting the money they wouldn't ordinarily get. So there's 3 different actors, 4, right? Outright scam charities, that's a 4th one. PACs, charity solicitations, fundraising companies, and the charities themselves. So there's 4 different groups out there vying for your money, and knowing who you're dealing with is the most important thing. And so asking a lot of questions, doing your own research, and making sure that you don't commit by giving them credit card information over the phone. Ask for things to come back to you in writing. That's always useful. Or ask for a website that at least gets you started on research. So make sure that before you hand your money over, you know exactly where it's going. So coming back to woodchucks, after a storm, you're going to have folks coming who ordinarily you would hire to, pick up debris, maybe, clean up your broken tree limbs, or it may just be folks in the neighborhood that you'll just go door to door. They're ordinarily landscapers. For some reason, a majority of them come from Culpeper County, Virginia. We don't know why. And Montgomery, our Office of Consumer Protection sits on a woodchuck task force with law enforcement agencies in Prince William County, Fairfax County, Howard County, Montgomery County, and DC. And so we share information about these woodchucks, you know, folks who can't chuck wood because woodchucks don't chuck wood. What they do is while they're up in your tree, they'll notice that your roof needs repair or your gutter is falling apart or your siding, there's something wrong with your siding, and they're offering to do it at some ridiculous price. They might talk you into letting them come into your house. They'll start to talk you into, well, what kind of work do you need? Do you need painting? You need drywall work? Do you need something repaired? They're not licensed for it. They don't care about that. They just want your deposit. You'll give them a deposit. They'll give you an invoice. It's usually on some kind of invoice they picked up at Home Depot that just says invoice on it. They handwrite their name and a phone number. Maybe it's their name. Maybe it's their phone number. Usually it's not. And so they take your deposit and they never return. Or they return and, you know, the work they do is substandard and unpermitted, obviously, because without a license, you can't pull a permit. So it's really, really important to make sure that you are vetting the person who's going to be doing work and making sure they are credentialed, experienced, and know exactly what they're doing, and that you can find them when you need them. Mail scams. It's not just about junk mail. So I always say junk email filters worked a little too well because now the mail is coming back into play as a medium of sending you scams. Mail marauders are those folks who drive around neighborhoods, look for your lifted mailbox flag, and steal your mail. And they're hoping to find checks so that they can counterfeit checks or try to cash those checks in there for themselves. Porch pirates, I think you've heard about, they're the ones who steal all the shipments, and Lord knows we're getting a lot of shipments these days. One area that I thought was of interest is because we talked about the NCTUE and how it's important to make sure if you're doing a freeze to hit them up. We had a scam buster who called a scam that she had busted. The doorbell rang and UPS dropped off a box from Sprint. Inside, she just happened to be right by the door. So she opened the door, picked up the box, brought it in. And within a minute, the door rang again, and there was a man outside who claimed to be UPS supervisor because the box was misdelivered. So she went back to the box and saw that no, it had her husband's name on it. And so she thanked the man and said, no, this was delivered correctly, thank you. When she opened it, there was 10 iPhone X's. And if you recall, when they first came out, those were $1,000 a phone. So she had a box worth $10,000 that had been delivered to her house. And in investigating it with Sprint, it turned out that her husband was a victim of identity theft. An account was opened in his name at Sprint. All those phones had been used, had been purchased in his name. And every information about the account was her husband's except for the email address, which belonged to somebody else. And so what this person was doing was sitting in the neighborhood waiting for the UPS delivery notice and then going in and stealing all of these boxes. And Sprint said if you had not been on top of the door, we would have had evidence that you had received these 10 phones, and therefore we would have insisted that you pay for them. So porch pirates meets identity thieves in real life here in Montgomery County. And porch piracy is essentially a new way of shoplifting. Instead of stealing in a store, they're now stealing outside your door. So if you think you have been a victim of any kind of mail fraud, you want to report it to the U.S. Postal Inspection Service so they can investigate, but report it to us as well so that we can do an alert. So our Scam Buster was very helpful, and we did a Scam Buster alert on the Sprint phone issue. So what are we seeing other than having your mail stolen and your packages stolen? You're going to get free lunch offers to come and listen to, how you can improve your finances, or multi-level marketing or pyramid schemes or some other kind of great deals. If you want to get out and you want to do a free lunch, that's fine. Just don't sign anything. We've had some folks come through and they had signed over property rights to their timeshare, which, you know, some people are more than happy to sign it over, but you know, they didn't realize exactly what they had signed. The overpayment scams, where checks show up in the mail and it's for more than what you had asked for. So say you're selling something on Craigslist or Facebook Marketplace for $20 and a check shows up for $25. And then they're like, oh, why don't you just write me a check for $5? And, or they decide, oh no, I don't really want what you were selling after all. Just write me a check back now that you've deposited it. Most folks think that once the check is available in your bank account, that the check is cleared. But what the bank is really doing is that they're just funding your account with that money. Consider it as a micro loan, if you will. If that check doesn't clear, that money will come right back out of your account. And it can take up to 2 weeks for a check to truly clear at the Federal Reserve. So that's where the overpayment scam works. It's between the time the funds are made available and when they actually clear. So if you wrote a check back to the scammer for the $25 or even for the $5, that's money that's gone that you're never going to see because that check's going to bounce in the next week. We're seeing a lot of lottery and sweepstakes scams in the mail, and another scam buster brought one from Publishers Clearinghouse. This one was interesting because normally they ask for the fees and interest and taxes for you to pay, and that's the scam. This time they included a check, and it was a check written on the Fortune Society, which sounded like, oh, well, that makes sense. It's a company that's willing to pay my taxes and to bring me my fortune. Turns out the Fortune Society check was written on the payroll account of a nonprofit in New York that had been a victim of fraud, probably insider fraud. And so that check never would have cleared, and then you writing the check out in your own name for the interest and fees and taxes would have been the overpayment scam again. Work from home scams, there's going to be a lot of those right now. We heard from another scam buster, a recent graduate, who had been offered a job based off a resume that had been posted on Indeed. The interview happened on a Google Hangout, so there was no video. And the person claimed to be, gave a name, and the scam buster did the research, and that person was the HR director of a major healthcare company. And the job immediately arrived, and they gave it to him right away. And as you would expect, they needed him to buy software to put on his computer to work from home. And as it turns out, when the check came, it didn't come from the company. It had a different name on it, just like the Publishers Clearinghouse situation. And once he didn't cash it, they disappeared. You're going to get things in the mail from psychics or political figures in foreign countries, you know, saying that yeah, they have all this money that's been inherited, but, you know, due to political circumstances, they can't get it. They need your help. And it's possible that you could end up with some fake census mailers. So again, I think it's really important to be vigilant. Don't trust, verify first before moving forward. If you have to give over any kind of money or information that's personal to you, it's probably a good advice to take on throughout. So this is a good spot to ask any questions if anyone has any questions. You can reach us at our website at the bottom of this slide, or you can email us as well. See there.
I have a question. Hello?
Hi, go ahead.
I was screening a call, and it said, if you don't want to get a call from us again, press 2 and you'll be on our do not call list. So the next time I heard it, I picked it up and pressed 2. Was that the correct thing to do?
That tells them that the one reason that we say don't pick up is that they don't know who they're calling. They don't know if they're calling a fax machine. They don't know if they're calling a dead number. They don't know who they're calling. So if you pick up, that number then goes from a, I don't know who it is, to it belongs to a human. And when you click on the numbers, it moves up to it belongs to a human that will engage. So it's a matter of how that number then becomes categorized in their system. So the best thing to do is just to hang up. Folks say, is it okay if I block the number? Know that you're not really blocking their number, because their number is some long number from, South Asia, Eastern Europe, or the Caribbean. And so you're not really blocking their number. You're blocking somebody else's number.
They have a recording on.
I'm
Yeah.
sorry.
I've
So
got a
that's it.
question.
Sure, go ahead.
Yeah, this is about passwords.
Okay.
I keep hearing that you have to make your password really complicated so nobody can guess it.
Right.
Well, I've got several different kinds of passwords that I use,
Mhm.
that derive from children's middle names or schools or things like that. I can't remember them. If I go on a website or my credit card and I have to remember it, I'll be knocked out after 3 tries if I don't get it right.
Mhm.
So I don't understand how, it seems to me that it's extremely unlikely that somebody, just by getting some information on me, can guess a password. Now, if the answer is that they keep trying day after day, well, isn't that on the website? If my credit card knocks me off 3 times a day, and then the next day 3 times, shouldn't they be then responsible to getting back to me and saying, hey, you've been knocked off 3 times in the last 5 days in a row? So I just don't understand this whole password thing.
Well, so if someone has hacked into a bank, for example, there's a feedback, I'm sorry. I'm not sure. If someone is hacked into the bank's system, for example, they're not going to run into that 3 strikes you're out algorithm. So they could be running a program onto the system that is just running all kinds of checks against these accounts until they can get into some. And so you can make the pass phrases complicated by just swapping out, like I said, you can, if there's an O, you can make it a 0, and if it's an A, you can use the @ sign, and you've already made a simple phrase complicated for that purpose. And one of the things if folks are on Facebook, there's these Facebook games that say, oh, what can you guess about me? And they'll have all these questions. What was my pet's first name? What street did I grow up on? What's my mother's maiden name? What does that all sound like? Those are all security questions that you were asked in setting up your password. So those Facebook games are not fun and games. And it's really important to know that with every data breach, a little piece of you is added to the dark web. So think of you as a giant puzzle, and every data breach adds another piece into the puzzle. So, there's some things called password keepers that will save your passwords. It's really, really important that you find a password keeper that is super secure so that it can just save them for you, so you don't have to try to remember them. Because obviously, if someone can hack into a password saver program, there's all the tickets to your kingdom, if you will. So you have to be very, very careful when you're using those.
Another technique that is simple is to just keep a running list of your passwords in your desk or something where you can look them up, or in a spreadsheet that only you have access to.
Yeah, there's a famous picture of Prince Harry when he was in Afghanistan, and there's a picture of him in the war room, and like right over his head is the Wi-Fi password. So you have to be very careful when you're writing things down on paper that they're not easily accessible or being put out on the AP Newswire, as in that case it was.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
So this is a really naive question. Is it a real person on a robocall? Or is it a recording? Who are,
So,
what,
yeah,
what is
well,
a robo? I think
so
it's a robot, but no.
it's a computer, it's a robo dialer is a system that they put on their phones. And this computer program essentially makes all the phone calls. And when it connects and you get that brief break, it's reaching out and grabbing the next available human in the cubicles in the call center to get on the phone with you. So that's one version. The other version is it immediately goes into a pre-recorded message where you have to press 2. You pressing 2 goes out and grabs the next available person in the call center. So that's how it really works. It's kind of an oversimplification, but that's how.
That's very helpful. Isn't there a way, you know, when somebody calls me, I have their number. What if we all save the calls, the numbers of the people who are behind these robos?
Because they're not using their numbers. They're calling from, say, the Ukraine, and they're calling you from a 301 number. They're not there. So they're spoofing and stealing somebody else's number and disguising their numbers. So
Okay.
it doesn't really work.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. Any other questions?
Yes, I have a question. A number of months ago, after some friends of mine died, I tried to register to be a whole body donor, not just through the Maryland driver's license, but to have it donated after death. And when they sent me all this information they wanted, it included information that allegedly is required for the death certificate, which includes my social security number, my birth date, my mother's maiden name, my ex-husband's name, when I was, you know, all these things. And so I just stopped, and I want to know if I was
And this was with the
realistic, or
MVA?
if I was just totally out of what, huh?
Is this still on the, was this at the MVA?
No, this is from Anatomy Gifts Registry, which is in Hanover, Maryland.
Well, I would seriously question why they need your social security number and your mother's maiden name and all that. I would be very, very concerned before. I mean,
Yeah, I
I don't
dropped
understand why they need it. I don't know why they would need that.
It's allegedly for the death certificate whenever I die.
Yeah, I mean, I would, oddly enough, I think the place to call might be at the MVA that does the organ donation program. They might have some more information as to these additional third-party companies. That might be a good place to start.
Thank you.
Can I just clarify what you had said before? So if we get a call and they say, press 2 to be disconnected and not to receive any more calls, that's spam. We shouldn't do that, to be disconnected.
I wouldn't waste your time.
Okay.
I just wouldn't.
Just
It doesn't do anything. Yeah.
Thank you.
I have a follow-up question. So for my landline for the past several years, at the recommendation of a friend, I've been using a service where my phone calls are forwarded to an 800 number. And the 800 number compares the incoming number against a list of do not calls. And if it's on the list, I don't get another ring. I get one ring. If it's not on the list, it calls through. Are you aware of that type of, I've never had any issues with it, and it works 80% of the time.
Yeah, that's one of those call blocking technologies I mentioned that they do. That's basically they're doing a verification of the number. And it can work if the scammers are using the same number again and again. If they're spoofing every number in your neighborhood, it's going to be harder to track that way.
That's consoling. Thank you.
Yeah, no, anything you can use to slow down the traffic is useful. And I've heard of that program. All right. Okay, well, thank you, everybody. I really enjoyed our time. And if you have any other questions, feel free to get in touch with us. We're always here for you and your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Tracy. Appreciate it.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Tracy.
Thank you. Thank
Thanks a
you.
lot. It was
Goodbye.
great. Bye-bye. Have a good afternoon.
Thank you very much.